Shabbat Shalom everyone. This week it is going to be Parshat Body Shabbat. Very interesting parsha where we see the last three plagues inflicted upon the Egyptians, upon the Mitzrayim, in retribution to all the great trouble they gave Am Yisrael, to the Jews, during their time in slavery. However, what's interesting I want to concentrate on today is that Chazal, they teach us something within regards to the plague of darkness. Not just the Egyptians suffered within regards to this plague, but many of the Hebrews, the Jewish people, had perished. According to Rashi, learning out from Mechilta, he actually states in Medrash that 4/5 of the Jews, they passed away in this plague of the darkness, which sounds atrocious, which sounds unbelievable. And there's two other Shitot that actually say that only 1/50 of the Hebrews had survived this plague. And another extreme opinion says 1 in every 500 Hebrews actually passed away. So seemingly, according to this tragedy happened in the plague of darkness was much worse than possibly for the Egyptians. Does this make sense? So Rabbi Shimon Schwab, a great rabbi from the last 200 years, has a take on this and says this can't be so. He disagrees that this actually had occurred. He really disagrees. So first of all, it's the mathematics. That doesn't necessarily add up whatsoever. It couldn't have been that within regards to, they started off as 70 Jews in Goshen, and 400 years later they were, let's say, even 300 million, or say the better opinion, 30 million over here. It couldn't have been. The maths doesn't add up. Also, it's not that Hashem was going to give a much greater punishment to the Jewish people, the Hebrews, than to the Egyptians, who had put them in all this treacherous labor for all those years in slavery. It couldn't have also been that. And thirdly, Chazal teach us that the Egyptians, they did not know that many Jewish people had died during this plague. So if so many Jews, even say 4/5 Jews, which is a less extreme opinion, they would have noticed, the Egyptians would have been, that so many Hebrews perished during that plague. So it doesn't make any sense from all accounts, all sides over here. It couldn't have been that so many people perished. And Rabbi Shimon Schwab, he holds strong and says it couldn't have been, for sure, it couldn't have been so. He takes an intake that's saying that it was actually much, much fewer Jews perished during this plague. There were Jews that passed away, but a much, much smaller number. So why such a great number is quoted over here according to the Medrash? So he says the Midrash should not be taken literally, and that it would have been that, say, the 30 million figure, or whatever it might have been, or the 3 million figure, or the 300 million figure, that would have been the amount of Jews that would have come out in later generations from this much smaller amount of Jewish people, the Hebrews, that had perished from there. And it could have been maybe 10 generations later. Let's just say, for argument's sake, it would have been a few thousand Jews even that perished. That few thousand, if they were perpetuated 10 generations later on, it could have resulted in dozens of millions or even more. So it was a much, much smaller number. It's just the amount of people that will come later. And there's a proof within regards to this, which we learned in Parshat Bereshit, when we learned only, we're talking about 10 weeks back, when there was a fight and Cain murdered Hevel, and when Hashem rebuked Cain and said, "Where is your brother?" and he cheekily answered, "I'm not my brother's keeper," he was referring to, Hashem was referring to, it's not just Hevel that is crying out to Hashem with this murder that took place. It was the bloods of Hevel. It was the generations that were going to come from Hevel, which later on, it could have been millions and millions of people just from that one person alone. So it's interesting. So we can't take necessarily, according to Rabbi Shimon Schwab, this medrash seriously, that 4/5 of the Jews perished. The equivalent of the amount of that in number, in generations later on, could have been that amount, but it could have been a much, much smaller number that actually perished from this. A much, much smaller number. And also what we can learn from this is, imagine we're talking about that a smaller amount resulted in, let's say, the Midrash uses hundreds of millions or dozens of millions. All the more so, each of us, what can come from us? You know, we could say that we're just a regular guy that just wants to enjoy the vanities of this world and nothing's going to come from us. Or it might be just a minimal amount of stuff can come from us, but not at all. Each of us has a power where we should look at ourselves that we can influence millions of people later on. Not even just nowadays with the acts that we do with regards to modern day. What will come from us? What do we teach our children, our grandchildren? Which values do we teach them? Those values, they can inspire potentially millions of people for the good. And also, unfortunately, the opposite could be true also, where if we teach our kids or our generations, our students, not necessarily the good things, imagine the reverse, the bad, that they can also perpetuate to other people also. So we learn from this week's Parsha, the greatness, the power that each of us has, and also that the Midrash maybe shouldn't be taken necessarily of how many Jews perish, because it might have been a much smaller number, and the disaster, which is very much illustrated in the Parsha, is that the Mitzrayim suffered the atrocities, especially when it came to loss of life numerically. So guys, I want to wish you all an awesome Shabbat, and I want to dedicate this video in memory of a friend of mine that passed away 2 months ago, Avram Ben Bracha, who sadly passed away very suddenly at a very young age, only 2 months back. Guys, have a blessed Shabbat and Shabbat Shalom, and enjoy.